That means you're on. Hi!
Hi. For Halloween, you look funny.
Oh, not as funny as you. Oh, who's that?
Good night, buddy. Oh, I got 2,
Go to bed.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
19, 20.
20,
Enough.
21, 22, 23, 24, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to bite your nose off. Give me a hug.
You have one number.
One? Okay.
Can I have some? Oh.
The kissing bug.
Okay, go to bed. Go to bed. Go to bed. Taylor Ray,
I want mommy time.
go to bed.
I want mommy
What's
time.
your father doing?
Oh, he's.
That's what I thought. Good night, dear.
That was a goblin.
Here.
A goblin.
I don't know how.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about family today. You're going to do all the talking.
All right.
And start anywhere you like.
Okay.
I want to hear about all my grandparents and great-grandparents and funny things that you remember and places that you've lived and
Okay.
anything you want to tell. And, you know, as you talk, I'll think of things to ask you.
To begin with, this is October 31, Halloween, in the year 2000.
Very good.
I go back to October of 1932, so that makes me 68. I just had a birthday this month. You want to talk about grandfathers? Let's start with Malin Willoughby, who I know very little about.
Well, what do you remember about him?
Willoughby was on my mother's side. She was Malin's daughter. There were several girls. But talk about Malin. Malin I knew as a real young boy in about the 4th or 5th grade, where I came from a very poor family. Very poor. We had lived in attics. We had lived in basements. And it had gotten really bad, and we had gone to live with him because his wife had died. And he was getting older, and my mother needed to take care of him. And we lived upstairs, my sister and I, and my mom and dad in one room. So what little I knew of Malin Willoughby was that he spent his whole life working on a railroad. I knew that somehow he was involved in maintenance. In other words, when trains would have accidents, he always went to the scene of the accident to help repair and restore and remove and do all that. He was a very stern man, very stern man. I can't honestly say I remember him ever smiling.
Was he kind to you or not?
One time, and only one time in all my memory, he came to an apartment house where we were living, and he brought me an apple. And that was a very big deal. I guess both from the standpoint that they were rare and expensive, but I don't remember him ever showing any exceptional kindness to the family. As it turned out, Malin owned several pieces of property, and after about a year living with him, he had given my mom and dad one of his properties at 1725 Lambert Street in Indianapolis.
Oh, that was his?
That was his.
I didn't
He
know.
built that house, or had it built, and that was the first time that my family ever had an opportunity to really step through the door and out of poverty. But I can remember, and at the time we weren't embarrassed by it, we were so thrilled, but they used to ship oranges in the grocery store in wooden crates. They called them orange crates. And they stood about that high, and they were about that wide, and they would pack those full of the fruit, and then put slats all around it to hold them in. Well, my folks got a hold of several of those, and we used those for tables and end tables and things like that.
Hmm.
That was our furniture.
Well, I know I've got ration books somewhere from
Well,
the war.
everybody had ration books
But
during
I've got
World
those
War
left
II.
over from. What was that like? Do you,
Uh,
do you remember that? Were you old
Yes,
enough?
I remember ration books. Because that would limit you to how much milk and eggs or whatever you could buy. And all civilian automobiles back in those days, only based upon the need to drive to your job and back. There was no joyriding, because they reserved gas for the military. And based upon the criteria, the essence of your job, they would issue you initially an A, B, or C little sticker that went in your window. And an A meant every week you were entitled to X number of gallons of gas. And almost everybody had A's. Several had B's, few had C. But if you were like a policeman, a fireman, and or somehow involved in the home guard or something like that, where you were on an emergency basis, I suspect doctors and nurses and hospital staff probably had a C.
So C, you got more than A.
And more than B, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that was back in the early 40s, 41 through about 45. And then as the war was nearing its close, why, the need for gas diminished and they did away with that system. That was for gas. The same thing applied to food goods. You had a book full of stamps, and each stamp had a fixed value. And when my mom would go to the store, she had to make decisions. What foods and how many stamps, it was a lot like money, how many stamps she could spare, because once she ran out of stamps, even though she may have dollars, she couldn't get the food. Everything was rationed. Maybe you could have 2 oranges, maybe you could have X number of canned goods or X number loaves of bread. But that's how everybody in the United States lived. That was considered to be contributing to the war effort.
We got off Malin, didn't we?
Well,
Were we done
but
with Malin?
we were living with him during that period of time, and toward the end of the war, toward 1946, 47 is when we moved to the house on Lambert Street. And then Malin, because he was an aged fella, and I don't know how old he was when he died, but he had to come live with us. And he grew senile and passed away.
No, but tell me about that house on Lambert Street. How big was it? How many bedrooms? Did it have a basement?
Well, no, it had a crawl space. It had, it was a two-story house. We did a lot of remodeling after we got in, and Dad and Mom both eventually got jobs and had a pretty good income. And we did some remodeling, but it, in essence, was 2 bedrooms upstairs. And what had been at one time the dining room off the living room was converted to Mom and Dad's bedroom, and my sister and I took the 2 bedrooms upstairs because by then we were both late grades in grade school, and of course we both went to high school from that location, so we wanted our own privacy. I can remember going down the street to a neighborhood movie show, and occasionally my mom and dad could come up with a little money, and every Saturday night, if they had Friday or Saturday night, if they had the money, they would give us a dime, and for 10 cents we could go to the movie show. Now, if we had, I think we got maybe some weeks 20 cents allowance, not every week, and if we saved any, well then what we had saved would buy our popcorn.
Well, was Malin married during
Yes.
any of the time that you remember?
Yeah, he had several wives.
Which one do you remember?
None of them,
None of them?
no.
Because I know that the one wasn't nice to your mother and made her
No,
move
that
out.
was,
Which one was that?
That was her stepmother, whom I had never met because I think she died. But she didn't care for any of his children. But my mother was the youngest of the children, and the others had grown old enough where when they married they could move out. But my mother was left there, and I can remember that several Christmases my mother said was particularly bad as far as her and her stepmother were concerned, and they would give her things like needle and thread to keep her clothes darned and sew up holes in socks and things like that. Never gave her what you and I would consider to be a gift. And I suspect a lot of that, reflecting back on those days and those times, had to do with hard times because nobody had any money back then. It was just 10 years after the Depression, and everybody was still struggling to gain something, be it a better job. I can remember when I was I was told, I must have been about 4 years old, but living in an apartment, and I remember very distinctly, historically, my parents telling me that my dad had a job, and I don't know what he did, but he made $5 a week.
A week?
A week, and 2 of those dollars went from my formula to feed me. So they lived on $3 a week. That bought their food and the apartment and everything they needed.
Oh my goodness. Well, where are you going to go from there?
Well, the other grandfather was John Herman.
Well, before we go to John Herman, you don't remember... No, because she died. Never mind. Go on.
Well,
Your
John-
mother's mother. She was dead a long time before you were
Yeah,
born.
right.
Okay, go ahead.
John Herman was, of course, my dad's father. He was a strict man. They had moved from Bloomington to Indianapolis, and he did a lot of odd jobs. Early in his life, he was a stone mason while he was in Bloomington, worked in stone quarries. And the thing that he was always the most proud of, that he told us, that much of the stone that was used in Washington, D.C. for a number of the major governmental buildings, he helped hew out of rock that was shipped to Washington because the southern part of Indiana had a very fine grade of limestone, and they could carve on it and make columns and do another thing. He was a stone mason. It was very hard work, but he was proud of that. He spent his life doing carpentry and things like that when he moved to Indianapolis. Very religious man.
Do you remember his dad?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
And he was married to Dora.
He was married to Dora, a very sweet lady. My grandfather probably never missed an event at the church when the door was open. And he, even into his 80s, walked. No, it was about 2.5 miles from his house to the church. And he walked it in all weather. He was always faithful for the Wednesday prayer meeting night. He was always at church. For a long time, he acted as janitor of the Blaine Avenue Methodist Church, and would come early and stoke and build the fires for the services, and be the last one to leave at night. Very religious man, a man I really loved and worshipped because he had character. It was back during those early days that my dad was a good provider, but my dad would go on drinking binges on weekends. He was a drunk on weekends. Now, I don't know why he didn't drink during the week. He didn't. But he drank on Friday and Saturday.
And that couldn't be good for the $3 that you had
No.
left.
It wasn't. But
Now, how long did that continue? Because I don't remember that when I was little.
we were still living on Lambert Street. And he had a job at Acetylene Products. He had to be at work at 4 in the morning and work till noon. But he would make acetylene. And I remember that he always walked to work, and he told us kids after one bad drunken weekend that he was going to quit. Of course, we'd heard that for years and never really believed it. But we come to find out that from that point on, he didn't have his weekend drinking binges. And he came to tell us tearfully. My dad thought he was a Christian, but he couldn't stay away from the booze. But he said that one morning, about 3:30 in the morning, as he was walking from home to his job at the acetylene place, middle of the night, he passed the church. That was his route to go to his job. And he knew that his drinking had hurt all of us. And he told us that he had made a vow, standing in front of the church that night, that he would never drink again the rest of his life. It was hard to believe. But that's what he said, and there was evidence early on that he was trying not to. Well, in essence, my dad kept that promise the rest of his life. with one short exception. And it was an exception because it happened years later and lasted one day and never happened again. And from that experience is where my love for my father grew, to see that he had the principle and the character and the love of the family to make that promise and resist that temptation and never drink again, because alcoholics have problems.
Oh, yeah.
But my dad stopped cold turkey. And I never forgot it as a kid. And that's why to this day I've never drank. Oh, I've sipped everything, don't like any of it. Not interested in it. Never have taken a puff of a cigarette, not interested in it. I was always involved in athletics, and it would seem like I need to stay in shape for one event or another as the year rolled around. Went to the Navy, and everybody would tell me I'd come out smoking and drinking and be a bum, and I never. Always had my dad as my idol. I really looked up to him, and I thought, if he can do it, I can do it. But I never felt the curiosity or the temptation.
What about your mom?
Well, my mother came from a hard background where she wasn't loved. I don't think she was physically abused other than mentally. And I do know that both Mom and Dad never got beyond the 8th grade, and that was about as far as anybody went.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. His brother, Uncle Ed and Uncle Bill, being younger and had an opportunity to go to high school, but I'm not sure either one of them finished high school. I know they just got to go. But after the 8th grade, my mother was expected to get a job, and she did. There was a place on West Washington Street in Indianapolis called the Star Store, and she began working there as a clerk.
What did they do?
It was a dry goods business.
Okay.
So they both lacked educations, as did almost everybody in those days. That was the norm.
Mm-hmm. But they could both read and write.
Oh, they could read and write, yeah.
Because a lot of them couldn't still.
Mm-hmm.
But she had a lot of physical problems, didn't she?
Well,
As she got older.
Later in life she did. Later in life, in the mid-50s, my dad had a real good job. A friend of his owned a blueprint company, engineering company, Charlie Marbaugh, and historically, back through the years, they had known each other, and when Charlie started his brand new business, which was a large business, they handled K&E product, which was the Cadillac of engineering tools, and did blueprints in the back with it. He asked my dad to come and be his superintendent, because he had a pretty big operation, and Dad went to work there and hired Mom as one of the blueprint people. So, he started getting bonuses at Christmas time, and they did well for uneducated middle-class people. So what was the rest of your question? Don't remember.
She was sick a lot.
Well, yeah, it was back, I think in the, I had gotten out of the Navy in 1955 after serving 4 years. And it was shortly after that Mom got a lump on her breast. No, I'm sorry. That was the second. To begin with, she had to have a radical hysterectomy.
That was the first thing?
That was the first thing. Cancerous. And later in life, it moved to her chest wall, and she had to have another radical breast removal.
What side was that? Do you remember?
I think it was on the left side. You must understand that the lack of knowledge on how to deal with cancer in those days.
Mm-hmm.
When they did surgery, it was radical, and a better term was it was a butchery. Terrible pain. People in the hospital, I don't know how they got through it. Terrible pain in the wards. Pain medicine really didn't touch anything, and the probability of successfully getting over cancer was very low.
Well, how long did she live after that?
Oh, she lived. That was in the 50s. She lived until I think 1969 or 70, and.
Well, so she lived a long time.
Oh, she lived quite a while, as did my dad, but
compared to Mother,
yeah,
who only lived 9 years
yeah.
with better technology.
But better technology, but in the early days for my mom, when they said radical, they went in and they cut everything out. And with your mother, why, they only took out what was necessary. Well, if you had cancer in your lymph nodes, which there's not a thing you can do for even to this day,
Right.
it had a propensity then to spread. And your mother's problem was that she knew she had a real serious problem of her breast. So bad, in fact, and I didn't know it, but she confided in me that her breasts were leaking. And finally she went to the doctor. Well, make a long story short, in truth, it was just much too late. She procrastinated for a long time.
She was scared to death.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
It had spread to her lymph nodes and then to her chest wall and on up into her brain.
Well, let's back up. We'll get here. I want to talk about your mom and what you remember about her mental state. Because I know we have a legacy on the female side of the Addams family of some problems. So what do you remember?
Well, I've thought a lot about you and Chick and your concern that there might be something here relative to manic depressive.
Wasn't your mom manic?
No, not really. You need to understand about my mother and my dad. Because they neither one had an education beyond grade school. And don't forget, her background was bad at home.
Right.
But when my mom and dad married, he overcompensated for her. He overprotected her. I can remember when I was in high school, my mother, living on Lambert Street, still didn't know how to walk 1 block from the house and get on public transportation, a trolley, give the man a token, and ride downtown. She couldn't do that. My dad had protected her. If she needed something, he went and got it. If she needed to go somewhere, he took her. Not that he was shielding her. To me, it was more out of love and respect for her that he just hovered over her. Probably too much so. In other words, she never had the opportunity to advance on her own or stand on her own and be independent. Dad was always there to support her. And to say that a disease, if you will, manic depression, was her problem, no. I don't believe so. Because she reached a point in life where, as Dad got sick from his cancer, she had to begin making decisions for the family.
Hang on just a minute. All right, we're back.
All right, I always felt that with Mom, it was just that she really never had an opportunity to grow, to mature, to assume responsibilities that would be normal for most other people, because that was my dad's nature, to love her and the family, and it was what I would call overprotection. But later in life, when he got sick and was forced into retirement because of his illness, we were living in Carmel, and she was still working for him at the Blueprint Company. She had to find a ride because she never learned to drive a car.
Mm.
She had to find a ride, a commuting ride, somebody in that very small neighborhood we were in that would take her to Indianapolis so that she could perform her job. That was a major crisis in her life. Assuming the breadwinning position, dealing with the logistics of getting back and forth, depending on others, and she was not able after about 2 months. Sometimes the people would pick her up, and sometimes they wouldn't, because maybe snow or something. I remember it was during the winter when all this was initiated. And the stress on her mentally was terrible. If you can't get on a trolley to go downtown, and if you can't drive a car, and if you've never been forced to make decisions other than those decisions you make in the home domestically, being out in the working world and having to commute over 20 miles back and forth every day, she couldn't handle that. She just simply couldn't handle that and worry about him laying there at home. And you have to understand too that the hospital that he went to be checked out when he had whatever he had, and we to this day don't know. One night he went comatose and was taken as an emergency case to the hospital, and they don't know whether he had a stroke. They don't know to this day what was wrong with the man, but they did say he came out of there incapacitated. In fact, he shouldn't have come out, according to doctors. He was terminal and was going to die in the hospital, and they called us up there one evening, and we stood there and listened to every breath he took. It was very belabored, and we didn't know whether he'd ever take another breath. So she had to go to work. They had just moved to Carmel, built a brand new home, were in debt. They were depending on their incomes. When they moved into their brand new home in Carmel, it was 30 days to the date they moved in that all this sickness hit them,
Hmm.
and it just was overwhelming for her to deal with mentally. And I was living with them. I was paying bills. Um, I was hoping then to be married and had to put marriage off because I knew they needed me in many ways, both physically and financially. I think that was her problem. And to say that she was manic depressive, maybe she was in medical terms, but in practical terms, I didn't think so. I just saw a woman that was totally stressed out because she was no more prepared to deal with what she was dealt than a 7 or 8 year old kid.
So, debunk the myth about how she died. Rumor
Go ahead.
is that she overdosed herself, whether intentionally or accidentally. What do you think?
Thank you.
I was, it was about noon on a Sunday, and my dad called me and said he couldn't wake her up, and I immediately went over to their trailer that they were living in, a mobile
Mhm.
home
Off of 10th Street, wasn't it?
off 10th Street, and I saw her and I slapped her face lovingly a couple of times to see if I could get any reaction, and there was no reaction.
Did
And
she have a pulse? Did you check?
Yes, she had a pulse and she was moaning. She wasn't verbal, but she was moaning. She was just unconscious. We called the rescue and the ambulance, and I went into the kitchen area and I saw the empty vial lying on the counter.
What was it? Do you know?
I have no idea. It was some of the medicine she was on, and she was on a lot of medicine, both for her I think stress. I don't know what all. Maybe pain.
Cancer? Still?
Uh-huh. Yeah. And that didn't strike me as, in that particular setting as an overdose, and I'll tell you why. My dad had declined to the point where she was taking care of him. And I never was able during this previous period, which was a couple of years, to determine that it was something that she couldn't do, because it was a domestic function. He was in the home, they were in the trailer, they had an income coming in, they could pay their bills, although I was buying their medicine. So it struck me that perhaps maybe she'd taken the last one or two out of the vial, as opposed to overdosing.
Mm-hmm.
It was never discussed. I've got to get away from this, or
You mean she never discussed it?
No, I would. It was, and we were pretty close. Never crossed my mind that she might have taken her life. Not, she and Dad were too close. Saw no signs leading up to that of depression, because by then they had sold the big home in Carmel and they were living in the mobile home, and they were pretty comfortable, except for both of them being ill, having their own physical problems.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, the follow-up story is that the doctor that attended my mother used to live across the street from us when we lived on Morgan Street there with Grandpa. He grew up and was about 2 years ahead of me, Alan Fisher. So I didn't know him
He was my
personally.
doctor, wasn't he?
Yes. I
Okay.
didn't know Alan Fisher personally, but I knew he lived on the corner. And he called me at home to tell me that the first thing they did when they got her in the hospital was pump her stomach. Well, that's an indication that you've taken too much of something.
You know,
Get
they
that
think
out.
you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by then I had been advised to go on home. There wasn't anything it could do. She'd be there for a while. He called me, I think, maybe the next morning sometime, and said that she had passed away. And
What did he say was the cause of death?
it may come to me, I don't even remember. I don't remember, but I do remember that and I guess I've forgotten over the years. I don't remember. I do know that he told me what he had written on the death certificate as cause of death, and it was something common. It wasn't from
I think it's heart attack on her death certificate.
Is it really?
I think so.
I have forgotten.
I'm not positive. I think it might be.
I have forgotten. Nothing that ever alarmed me. And then, you know, many years later, in fact, almost, you might say recently, Chick has said that she had talked to that doctor and he had told her she had overdosed. And that was a shock to me because I had never heard that, and I had gathered up the death certificates and all of that and provided for the funeral, and was never told that until many years later by my sister. And I know Chick really believes it because she says she had a conversation with Alan Fisher. And I don't know. I don't know why Alan would tell me one thing and write a death certificate and then tell Chick something different.
But he did tell you that they pumped her stomach.
Yes. They were doing that when I was in the emergency room. That's the first thing they did.
And he didn't say why he was doing that or what the
No.
results of that
Yeah,
were.
it was, to me, immediate protocol. They took her into the emergency room. They took her vitals. They asked me what I saw and what was the setting. I had either brought to the hospital or provided the ambulance people the empty vial so they would know
what she was
what
taking.
she was taking. And they said, well, the first thing we're going to do is pump her stomach, and I suspect, too, through that process, they would learn an awful lot about what was there. And I wouldn't have been alarmed about a lot of drugs, just like with Shirley. Shirley's life is a drug maintenance program. Well, so was Mom's. You know, she lived only through the grace of her medicine. And I knew when you put a pump out that kind of a stomach, you're going to find traces of drugs. That's how she lived for years. So to this day, I don't know. I could understand Chick believing that with her problems as they are and wanting to relate it back to Mom. But Mom never, and see, I didn't get married till I was 33 and I lived with them all that time.
You were 36.
No, I was 33.
33?
Yes.
Well, you were 36 when I was born.
Yeah.
That's right.
She was, I can honestly say, she was never manic for one day in all that time. Would she weep? Yes. But I think as I've tried to paint a picture of her background, there were a lot of things she couldn't handle. And she'd call me and need help, or advice. And but it was never a desperation call. Mom could make it well at home. That was her castle. She could manage that. Great cook. But she was sick. Dad was sick. They knew they weren't going to be any better. She worried about him. He worried about her. Of course, I think it was 13 months after she died, he passed away while I was on vacation in Jackson Hole.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Well, he was living with us.
Yes. Well, I had gotten back home, terminated the vacation, drove straight back because he wasn't answering the phone. And on a hunch, I called St. Vincent's Hospital, because that's where they both always went, and asked if they had a Carl Raymond Adams, and they said they did. And I got to talk with him, and he told me that he was blind in one eye, and that had been from a long time back in his life. But they said that he had contacted glaucoma, and there was a lot of pain involved, and that's why he was in the hospital. So we got back, and
Was he living with us at that time when we
not
were on
exactly
vacation?
at that time. No, he was still in the trailer.
Oh,
When he
okay.
came out of the hospital, he went to live with John Herman
Oh, he did?
for a few days of recovery, and then we had a very small house, less than 1,000 square feet. But we cleaned out one back room so that he could come and live with us. And he was only in John Herman's 2 or 3 days, and I went and got him and brought him home. And seemed to be doing well. He recovered from that, and could get up and get around the house well, and always walked with a cane. And
I have it.
yeah, and of course he used that cane because earlier he'd had his right lung removed because of cancer, and the way they made the incision then made him walk tilted
To the side.
to the side, and he needed that cane to hold his posture up. So he was in the back room one evening, and I knew he had taken cold. I knew he had a cold. Not a bad cold at the time. But I told him that if he was going to have problems breathing, or if he needed any of us during the night, the signal was to take his cane and tap on the wall, because his bed was next to the wall, and then the next room, that's where we slept. And one night about midnight, he started tapping on the wall, and I went in to see what was wrong, and he says, "I'm having a real hard time breathing." And the cold apparently was getting worse. And I says, "Well, Dad, if you're not breathing well, you've got to go to the hospital." And that night, about 1 o'clock in the morning, we called an ambulance and got him into St. V's again. And I followed the ambulance in, and they admitted him and got him in a ward. There probably were 10 other beds in that room. And he was down at the extreme end, and he got the last bed, it looked like. and they did not have him in an oxygen tent, but the room was conditioned. You know, I don't believe that it was responsible for anything going on with him. And everyone advised me going home. We'll watch him during the night, and won't be anything done until tomorrow morning. Well, this is maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. So I went home, went to bed. About 4:30, the phone rang, and it was Dr. Alan Fisher. And he says, "I'm sorry to tell you, but your dad's passed away from pneumonia." And I've since learned that there is the different types of pneumonia, but one type particularly, they can take you very quickly. And it must have. I never saw him again.
Hmm. See, this is the first time I'm hearing a lot of all this.
So that left nobody. In truth, my dad had no will to live after Mom died. It was an existence because he was staying alone, fixing his own meals, and of course we'd have him over often, but he wasn't really interested in that. He just really wasn't interested in much of anything. Sit during the day and watch his TV, but he'd lost interest in life. You know, nothing excited him. His life with Mom was over, and in essence, so was his life. So,
You tired? You want to stop?
no, I'm all right.
Well, what do you want to talk about? What do I need to know? What's Taylor Ray need to know? You want to talk about Mom?
Well, not really. I don't see any need to talk about that. You lived through that. You know that.
Well, but not the early part. When you knew her
Well-
when she was young, before you got married.
Before we got married, I had, before I went to join the Navy, I had graduated from high school, and my first job was at MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Pictures, and it was owned by a company called Lowe's Incorporated. MGM made the pictures and had exclusive contract with Lowe's, and Lowe's was the name of all the major theaters throughout the United States
Uh-huh.
where
Still
they would
is.
exhibit their pictures. And a friend of mine from church needed an assistant to work with him in the shipping room, and that's where I started working. I worked there a couple years, and the war in Korea had heated up, and they were drafting people my age from my neighborhood that month. And I decided I did not want to go to the Army, and I would rather be in the Navy. For a lot of reasons. Number one, when you're in the Navy, you know where you're going. You're going to sleep in a clean bed every night.
And you're going to be seasick every single day.
Like I was. But, you're also going to get 3 good meals a day. And that was better than being in the Army and sleeping in the mud and eating rations. So I went to the Navy for 4 years. Wasn't on board ship the first 2 years. As luck would have it, I went to Japan, and worked in a harbor defense unit in Sasebo, Japan, and was there for about 20 months. First time I'd ever been away from home. I loved the Japanese people. I loved the culture. I loved the country. I learned a lot of the language then. I did have a Japanese girlfriend that over time I finally met. And she was a companion, and when I would take leave, if I wanted to go to a movie or someplace, why, I could go see her, and we were buddies.
Linda?
Shizui Yanagita, Linda. My job in the Navy in Sasebo, I was on a remote isthmus of land that stuck out into the harbor, and we had strung a submarine net from one side of the harbor to the other so that enemy submarines could not sneak into the naval harbor and blow up the American warships. I was about 7 miles out from where the base was, and was both a sonar and radar operator. And we were listening for the submarines or any foreign ship that would try to come into that harbor at night. We always closed the net, submarine netting, across the harbor so that nothing could sail in or out. And of course we had radar. We could see almost all the way to Korea. But that's what I did. And anyhow, after I got out of the Navy, and the Navy's a long story, you don't want to hear that, MGM was obligated to take me back because I was a serviceman, find a job for me. And I didn't want to be a burden to them, but I called the branch manager and said, I'm out of service now, and is there anything available anywhere in the United States so that I can go back to work for MGM? And he says, it just so happens we got your old spot available. So I went back there, and over a period of time I became the head shipper there, which was a very good job. But it was there in that environment that I met your mother. I worked at MGM. She worked at Warner Brothers, another office just around the corner from ours. And we both ate lunch at the same time and almost daily in the same location. And I always thought she was attractive. Always watched her. She was always with another gal. But she was then dating one of the dippiest guys I think I ever knew.
Keith.
I don't know what his name was. No, Keith was in high school.
Right.
This was another kid working on film roll.
Oh, I didn't know about him.
For another, yeah. And I kept thinking, what does she see in this guy, you know? Because I thought she was very attractive, very pretty. And as fate would have it, she knew that I worked with another fellow by the name of Carlos. So Don and Carlos ran the shipping room for MGM Pictures. And she thought I was Carlos. So when I called her, finally got up the nerve one day and called her and asked her for a date, she didn't know who Don was. But we talked our way through that, and then she wasn't sure, because she thought she was going to have that date with Carlos. She didn't know what Don looked like. Well,
But she thought you were Carlos.
she thought I was Carlos. But we finally got past that, and I was interested in her. after the first date. I think we went to a movie or something. And I told her that I would call her and we'd do it again, and there was a stage show coming in about a month that I thought she might like to see, and I know I wanted to see. And I don't remember what happened, but I never got around to calling her, and that stage show came and went. And we
Oh.
neither won. We neither won. But word got back to me that there was somebody kind of disappointed that I never followed up. Well, that kind of opened the door. I thought on the date she was nice, but I never really saw anything long term there from the first date, So I called her, and I thought, in as much as what I'd heard, I owed her an apology, and we talked about, well, in a couple of weeks I'd give her another call, and I did. And our relationship started slowly. And just grew from there. And we, in essence, dated for a little over 7, almost 8 years. And long before the end of that 8 years, I had really wanted to marry, but couldn't because of Mom and Dad and the new home, and then their illness and debts and things that they needed my income and my presence to run a new house and just do a lot of things. So even though my folks never got any better, we reached a point at about the 7th year or so where I said, and this is a promise I made to her, I said, if I ever get both parents out of the hospital at the same time and they start getting well, we're going to get married. Well, we neither one.
Well, that's romantic.
Well, there for years, literally years, my mom and dad rotated in and out of hospitals. And if one wasn't in, the other was. And then there was the healing period, and then one would crash and go again. But we finally reached a point, and I said this was it, and it scared her to death. And we had been engaged off and on, and I had broken the engagement several times because she wouldn't give me a date of, when, if I'm going to be engaged, then I want to know, well, when do you want to get married? And she wouldn't set a date. And I said, well, I'm not going to be engaged for nothing. And then I'd date around again, but always have her too.
Did she know that?
Oh, yes. Wasn't happy with it, but
No.
I said, in fact, I got my engagement ring back a couple times, but I said, I'm committed, but if you're not committed, then I don't have a commitment to you. Trying to force her into making a decision. Well, when Mom and Dad reached a point where they both were home and neither one were in the hospital, and things not necessarily looking good, but I knew even if I was married I could still pay some bills because I was making pretty good money then on the police department. That's why we got married in March. March is not a very good month.
No, it isn't,
And then-
especially not March
Yeah,
12th.
Not March 12th. And the day we got married, it was raining, but we got married. And, my one desire in life was always prayed that the Lord would let me have my wife and we would celebrate a 50th anniversary, a golden anniversary. Always thought that was special. And I never had that. 19 years. I guess the Lord, the only way I'm going to get 50 years is with two women.
A combination, huh?
Mhm.
Maybe even 3.
Maybe even 3.
Well, this has been very informative and very melancholy. Tell me something that you remember from being little that was good.
Oh my. I don't remember anything bad about my childhood. Life changed for the better for us when we moved into Grandpa's home there on Lambert Street. I met neighbors and developed lifelong friends. Dale across the street. First day I met Dale, I was trying to show him how smart I was in jiu-jitsu. And I threw him over my back and bloodied his nose. And we've laughed about that to this day. That first day I met Dale, I bloodied his nose. And then Susie next door was my off and on again first kind of girlfriend. We went to a movie together, and I talked to Susie not too many months ago. Told her where I was at, and she thought I was awful lucky living here. She still lives right across the street to this
On
day.
Lambert.
On Lambert Street. Just lost her husband. I really called her to pay my sympathies because her husband had just retired and was out one evening on his motorcycle. And I can't, knowing Chuck, I can't see him on a motorcycle, but apparently he got one. And he was out in the neighborhoods riding his motorcycle and got struck at night by a car on a side street, killed. And I know that's devastated her. And so I just called to talk about old times. But you say talk about good things. Well, from there on, that was about the 7th grade where things started turning good. Where Mom and Dad had some room to breathe, had a home for the first time. I was, 12, 13 years old, had a home, a secure place. My grandfather gave us the home. We never paid rent, just gave us a house. Went to high school, made friends. In fact, it was a period of developing friendships. As you know, both grade school playmates and classmates, Lloyd Brown and Wayne Ormsby, have been here to the house.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Years later,
Do you remember anything about the Mitchells and the Bohannons that from when I was little? Like thinking about like Papa and Mama that I don't really remember.
no. Judy's family was unlike the Adams family, which was, the Adams family was, was a large family, brothers and sisters, and always gathered as a family for all the holidays, and generally on Sunday everybody would drive around to each other's house and just spend that a few hours with each other. That wasn't the kind of family she came from. She didn't come from what I would call an organized family. They, I don't think it was until we were married that they really celebrated Christmases where they had family in. So you only saw some of those people once a year, if then. So where I was, raised in a close, loving family and had the value of those relationships down through the age, aunts, uncles. As you know, they've all been here for family reunion. It's a close-knit family. Judy's family wasn't like that.
Well, we got half hour left on the tape if you want to use it. You want to talk about Aunt Maggie or Aunt Minnie or?
Didn't know them that well. I was too young.
Or your trip down to see Susie, Aunt Susie down in Kentucky?
Don't remember. I remember the trip. Don't remember anything about Susie. In fact, if you hadn't said Susie, I wouldn't have known her name.
Okay. So that's where I'm stuck on the family tree. I can't get past that.
I remember they lived in an apartment in Covington, Covington, Kentucky. And one time we drove down there, and I remember they lived upstairs, and I remember you could sit in the windowsill and look down on the street.
So they were in town.
They were in town. Not well-to-do either, but then nobody was. We were all pretty equal.
Well, we've got a letter from Susie to Malin, and she wasn't very literate either.
I can believe that.
Okay. Now, what about, because Maggie was your favorite aunt?
Yes. Maggie lived in New York. She lived in Brooklyn. She had married a foreigner, a fellow by the name of Carl Stiegler. Carl was a German, an immigrant, had come through Ellis Island and all of that.
Oh, really?
Met Maggie and married. He was a butcher. I do not remember him. I was so young. I probably was no more than the first grade, which would have made me probably 5 or 6 years old. We went to New York 2 times. Maggie came to visit us. She was as lovely a person as I had met in my life at that time. And the one thing I remember about Maggie is the one time we took her to the train station in Indianapolis so she could go back to New York. I remember to this day how hard I cried when she left. She was just a person that I just loved. An older lady, but she was so gentle and kind and so graceful. And she paid attention to me, maybe, but I just cried when she left. I know the thing that struck me about Maggie, on her first trip to our house on Lambert Street, she came only one time. And she could not get over how in the city of Indianapolis there were trees. People had trees in their yards and their backyards, and the streets were lined with trees, because in Brooklyn it's all concrete.
Right.
And she could not get over the beauty of people owning trees.
Huh.
That was something.
I
I remember
that.
the time we went to New York. We went to, She took us on the subway to Coney Island. I
Hmm.
remember that. It was a gray and cloudy day.
Hmm.
And there was an airplane in the sky with one of those long advertising tails behind it, you know.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget, right there on the beach, the plane nosedived and crashed into the beach. And we went over and saw the wreckage. And then immediately they took us home, my sister and I. I don't know any of the circumstances, whether the pilot was killed or anything, but I remember that.
Hmm. How old were you?
Probably 5, 6.
Wow. Hmm.
You know, you think that I haven't had a good life. I have. We're
No, I don't
talking.
think that you've had a bad life, but everything that we've talked about has been sad.
It's sad because I came out of poverty, really, and those were really hard times. I can remember night after night, maybe eating nothing but beans on a plate. But I didn't know I was poor. You know, you had so much love and warmth in the home. I never had a cold night. I may have worn hand-me-down clothes. And at Christmas I might have had the Salvation Army come and give me broken toys, but at least I had toys even if they were broken.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know better. I've had a real good life. You know.
Well, now you get to look out your window at the elk and the mountains every day, so.
Yeah, but it started long before that. It started with a good marriage to your mother, and then to have a little brat.
Me.
to have you're my whole life. I love you very much, and I always have. And I wish we hadn't had some misunderstandings, but it had to happen for you to grow up, I guess. But I think we're close now,
Yeah, I think so.
and it's reflected in your daughter.
And my phone bill.
And I love that little munchie.
She's pretty cool.
Oh, we had a good day yesterday.
Yeah.
So,
Went down to see our new property that we don't live on.
well, good Lord willing, one of these days.
Yeah, she loves her papa.
She loves both of us.
She loves everybody.
Yeah,
What are you
she-
talking about? She
There's
loves
been
everybody.
such a beautiful change in her in the last 3 months. Her vocabulary has increased. Her understanding has increased. She's very quick. She's very bright. And I'm concerned that we can keep the right kind of challenge in front of her so that she can mentally and emotionally develop into all the potential that she exhibits now. I don't know who she will be or what she will be, but she has the potential to be a very exceptional person. Have no idea in this world what field she'll want to be in. I would probably lean toward believing science,
Me too. That's what I would guess.
because she has a very curious mind. She has good retention, memory, and she wants to know, and she's so quick.
and rotten.
She's a kid.
Hmm?
She's a kid.
Well, she'll watch this someday and hear her mama say she was rotten,
Well,
but
I,
she was.
I can remember the night John Herman turned 100,
Oh,
and we taped him, and you.
I know.
I think you have those tapes, and
I think I was.
this interview hasn't been the same as his.
No, his was a lot of dates and facts and names, and I already have all that. And I
Yeah.
wish that we could have heard more from him about what he remembered about being little and what he felt about all the family.
Well, I think John Herman. I think I heard one time that he maybe got to the second, or maybe third. I think the second grade.
And I think he said on that tape, and I want to say maybe it was the 3rd grade, and maybe even it was the 5th grade. But it wasn't very far because he worked on the farm.
Mm-hmm. And everybody had to in those
Yeah.
days.
But he was such a bright man for not having any education. And he was my buddy. And I remember what his house smelled like, even today, to walk into the house and see him and Nora, and there was a piano, and the floors creaked, and it smelled like old people. And the kitchen was ancient,
Had a pump for
cast
water,
iron.
sink, and the pump
Uh-huh.
to pump water.
And that's all I remember. I don't think I was ever allowed back in any other part of the house. I wasn't allowed to go look at the bedrooms or.
Well, when we lived with Malin Willoughby in his house on Morgan Street, the water was still outside. You had to go outside and pump it. And it was a wood burning stove in the kitchen. And they kept the fire, even in the summer, they kept that fire and that stove going because that's how they cooked their meals.
Mhm.
And I to this day don't understand, with all the modern conveniences we have, if you want to cook something at 350 for 30 minutes, you put it in, you turn the dial, and you forget it. And how those people could regulate the heat and know the time and just
It was a
Keep-
different life.
keep lifting the lid and throwing in another little piece of wood to keep it burning and keep it hot and going. It was.
It was a full-time job
Yeah.
for Mom.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't think of anything else unless there's something you want to add.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Wait, bye.